so sorry, but your iPhone 17 is toast," my daughter-in-law said, sliding the shattered device across the kitchen table toward me. My son just mumbled under his breath, "It was just an accident, Mom." I looked at both of them, gave a slow nod, and didn't say a single word, because in that moment, it finally clicked. It wasn't my phone that was broken. It was my patience. "I'm really sorry, but your iPhone 17 broke," my daughter-in-law Chloe said, after I'd refused to hand her any more money. Her voice was flat, indifferent, as if she were talking about a dropped glass of water. My son Julian just let out a low sigh. "It was an accident, Mom." He muttered, his eyes glued to the floor. I looked down at the spiderweb of cracks on my brand new phone. No one drops a phone in a way that completely obliterates both the front and back glass unless they mean to. I stayed perfectly calm. No screaming, no accusations, no tears. I knew she was fishing for a reaction. Chloe wanted me to lose my cool so she could play the victim. I picked up the wreckage in silence and tucked it into my pocket. "That's a shame," I said simply, and walked out of the room. Ever since my husband passed away 3 years ago, Julian and Chloe had been living in the upstairs suite of my house in Portland. At first, it was supposed to be a temporary fix, but it had turned into a permanent habit, a habit where my boundaries were becoming increasingly blurred. Chloe used my things-charged groceries to my accounts and demanded favors like they were her birthright. When she asked for $1,200 this morning for a much-needed weekend getaway, and I finally said a firm no, I knew there'd be fallout. A few hours later, my phone was in pieces. In my bedroom, I locked the door. I sat at my small desk by the window, opened my laptop, and took a deep breath. My pity for my son had kept me blind for too long. I'd kept hoping things would just sort themselves out, but that time was over. The broken phone wasn't the real problem. It was just the spark. I logged into my accounts and began a systematic overhaul. No more debates, no more false hopes. Starting today, I was taking my world back. I changed my first set of passwords and reached for the landline. My next move was clear, and it couldn't wait another minute. I'd been quiet for way too long. The first thing I did was disconnect all my devices from the family sharing plan. A year ago, Chloe had linked her devices to my account for several expensive streaming services. The subscriptions were being billed to my credit card every month like clockwork. I clicked Remove Member and wiped her profile from the list. Every click felt like a long, cathartic exhale. Next, I opened my grocery delivery app. Julian and Chloe used the service for their weekly hauls, and the bill automatically went to me. It was convenient for them, but incredibly expensive for me. I deleted my payment info, removed the delivery address for the upper unit, and changed the password. I did the same with our shared household supply account. No warnings, no heated arguments, just practical facts. Around noon, I heard Chloe swearing loudly in the hallway. She called out for Julian, her voice peaking with frustration. "My tablet isn't working, and the grocery app is asking for a new credit card," she shrieked. I sat in the living room, calmly sipping a cup of coffee. A few minutes later, Julian came downstairs and tapped hesitantly on my door. He looked embarrassed as he poked his head in. "Mom, Chloe's having an issue with the accounts." "Did you change something?" I set my cup down and looked him dead in the eye. "Yes," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "I'm restructuring my finances. From now on, you'll need to pay for your own groceries." He blinked, totally blindsided by my bluntness. "But Chloe was just about to place a big order for the weekend," he stammered. "Then I guess she'll have to use her own bank card," I replied coolly. Julian didn't know what to say and slowly backed away. He expected me to cave the moment he gave me that sad puppy look. In the past, it might have worked, but those days were gone. My new boundaries were set in stone. I opened my book and savored the silence. The first step was taken, but it was only the beginning. Soon she'd realize the grocery delivery was the least of her problems. Early the next morning, I went down to the basement. Over the last few months, Chloe had started treating my large storage pantry like her own personal corner store. If she ran out of wine or needed laundry detergent, she just helped herself to my shelves. She never asked, and she certainly never replaced what she took. I'd called a local locksmith who arrived within 30 minutes to install a new deadbolt on the pantry door. It was a simple fix, but highly effective. I slipped the only key into my pocket. Then, I cleared out the hallway and stacked their old cardboard boxes on the stairs. That afternoon, I heard determined footsteps heading for the basement. Chloe was on a mission, likely looking for a bottle of Cabernet. The faint sound of the doorknob turning quickly escalated into a violent, angry rattling. "Julian," she yelled through the house. "The pantry door is stuck. I can't get it open." I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. "The door isn't stuck," I said, my tone friendly but firm. "I had the lock changed. That's my private storage now." Chloe stared at me like I'd just declared war. "But where are we supposed to keep our stuff?" she asked, indignant. "And what about the wine for tonight? There's plenty of room in your own kitchen for your things," I answered. "And as for the wine, you'll have to buy your own from now on." She opened her mouth to snap something back, then thought better of it and shut it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stomped upstairs. It was obvious she hadn't expected this much resistance. She expected me to cry or justify myself. Instead, I was just creating facts she couldn't ignore. I went back to my cozy living room with a small, satisfied smile. My home was becoming mine again. And next, I was going to reclaim the garage. My late husband had left behind a little sedan that I almost never used. Chloe had basically hijacked the car because it was more convenient than taking the bus. She parked it in my second garage stall and filled the rest of the space with her old furniture. That morning, a car buyer I'd called the day before showed up. He looked over the car, we settled on a price, and I signed the title over. He towed the car away and transferred the money to my savings account immediately. After that, I called a junk removal service to clear out the rest of the clutter in that stall. When Chloe got back from her shift, she stood frozen in front of the empty, swept, clean garage. She stormed into the house and pounded on my door, her face flushed with rage. "Where's the car?" she demanded, not even bothering with a hello. "I sold it," I said calmly, casually dusting a shelf. "But I need that to get to work," she nearly screamed. "It was my car, and I didn't need it anymore," I explained. "The insurance and registration were getting too expensive. And my furniture?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It was mostly junk, so I had it hauled away to the dump." Julian stepped up beside her, looking at me pleadingly. "Mom, you should have told us first," he said reproachfully. "It's my property," I said, simply meeting his gaze. "If Chloe needs a way to get around, she can take the bus or buy her own car." I handed her a printed bus schedule I'd looked up earlier. She stared at the paper like it was poison and let it flutter to the floor. Without another word, they retreated to their unit. They were starting to realize that my support was officially ancient history. But the biggest blow, the one that would hit their wallets the hardest, was yet to come. They'd never paid a dime toward the utility bills. That was about to change. Early the next morning, I sat at my round kitchen table with a calculator. I pulled the old folders from the cabinet and lined up the bills for water, electricity, and heating. Julian and Chloe had the entire top floor to themselves, but hadn't paid a cent toward the overhead. I calculated the usage based on square footage and added it all up. The total was significant, especially since Chloe liked her 20-minute hot showers. I wrote the monthly total on a clean sheet of paper, attached copies of the bills, and tucked it all into a plain white envelope. Around noon, I went upstairs and knocked. Julian answered in his pajamas, looking like he'd just woken up. "Here's your share of the utilities," I said, handing him the envelope. "I expect this amount in my account by the first of every month." He opened the envelope, saw the number, and went pale. "Mom, this is almost half my paycheck. How are we supposed to pay this?" he cried out. "That is exactly what you consume," I said, without a shred of guilt. "It's only fair you pay for what you use. I'm not subsidizing your lifestyle anymore." Chloe appeared behind him and snatched the paper. "This is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just bill us like we're strangers," she yelled. "Actually, I replied already, turning to leave. "Family doesn't mean I pay for your luxury on my dime." I walked down the stairs without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Chloe starting a screaming match with Julian. She was demanding he fix this and talk some sense into me. But there was nothing left to talk about. The hard facts were there in black and white. They still thought they could just ignore my rules and wait me out. But the next problem was already waiting for them in the kitchen. Up until now, the big kitchen downstairs had been common ground. I'd always kept the fridge stocked, and Chloe would help herself to the expensive cheeses, fresh salmon, and organic greens I bought. Since I'd cut off the delivery service, I noticed my own supplies were dwindling fast, so I started buying only exactly what I needed for myself. I emptied the fridge, scrubbed it clean, and assigned them the bottom 2 drawers. I placed a strip of bright red tape across the glass shelf above them. My food was strictly kept on the top shelves. The next evening, Chloe was planning an elaborate dinner for her friends. She stood in front of the open fridge, dumbfounded. "Where's the salmon and where's the wine?" she called out. I sat at the table drinking tea and reading the news. "I only shopped for myself," I said, without looking up. "Your drawers are at the bottom. They're empty because you didn't buy anything." "But my friends are going to be here in an hour," she shrieked. "I can't just serve them pasta and ketchup, then you'd better hurry." "The grocery store down the street closes in 40 minutes, I suggested helpfully. She slammed the fridge door so hard, the glasses in the cabinet rattled. A few minutes later, she bolted out of the house to do some panicked, expensive shopping. Julian came in shortly after shaking his head. "Mom, did you have to let her crash and burn like that?" he asked weakly. "I'm not letting anyone crash," I replied, folding my paper. "I'm just done providing for capable adults who treat me with zero respect." He turned away in silence because he knew I was right. The dinner party happened, but the vibe was clearly ruined. Chloe finally understood that the all-you-can-eat buffet was closed. She didn't know yet, though, that the stove was about to go cold for her too. It had been a long-standing tradition that I'd cook a big roast dinner for the 3 of us every Sunday. Chloe had grown accustomed to just showing up at the table at 1 p.m. Often, she'd even invite guests over without even asking me. But this Sunday morning, the house didn't smell like rosemary and slow-roasted beef. I got dressed up, grabbed my purse, and took my keys. Around 11 a.m., Chloe came downstairs looking hungry and expectant. "When's dinner?" "My brother is coming over in a bit," she said, looking confused at the clean, cold stove. I put on my coat, feeling completely relaxed. "I'm not cooking for you today," I said brightly. "I'm meeting an old friend at a bistro downtown for brunch." She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "But it's Sunday." "You always cook on Sunday," she protested. That was then. This is now," I replied, opening the front door and breathing in the crisp air. "You're adults. If you're hungry, you know how the stove works." I shut the door behind me and left her standing in the foyer. Brunch with my friend was lovely and did wonders for my soul. When I returned that afternoon, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Julian was sulking in the living room next to some empty pizza boxes. He gave me a dirty look but didn't say a word. Chloe ignored me entirely, which honestly suited me just fine. My new boundaries were inconvenient for them, but they were working wonders for me. I was finally done being the invisible servant in my own home. They thought they could punish me with the silent treatment, but I was busy enjoying the peace. The first of the month came and went without a single cent hitting my account. Julian and Chloe acted like they'd either forgotten the envelope or were staging a protest. They were betting that I'd hate the conflict and just drop it. The next day, I called my HVAC guy. I asked him to separate the thermostat control for the upper unit from the main floor. He installed a simple but effective bypass valve and put a lockbox over the main controls in the basement. I set their floor to a constant 64 degrees. It was legally habitable and kept the pipes from freezing, but it was far from cozy. If they wanted it warmer, they'd need to invest in some sweaters. As the evening temperatures dropped, the house got chilly. I was sitting comfortably by my crackling fireplace when Julian came stomping downstairs. "The heat isn't working upstairs," he yelled, rubbing his arms. "It's freezing in the living room. Chloe is miserable. The heat is working fine," I said, tossing another log on the fire. "It's set to 64. That's plenty." But why, he asked, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Because you didn't pay the utility bill," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not paying for heating oil so you guys can walk around in t-shirts all winter." He balled his fists in frustration, but he had no logic to fight me with. "You can't do this, Mom. You're our mother." He tried going for the emotional juggernaut. "I'm also the homeowner," I corrected him. "And the free bed and breakfast is officially closed." He turned around without a word and trudged back up to the cold. It was finally sinking in they couldn't keep living like this. The breaking point had arrived. They had to decide what their future looked like. 2 days later, Julian showed up at my door again, this time with Chloe in tow. She was wearing a heavy parka inside the house and glaring at me with narrowed eyes. "We can't live like this," Julian started. "We can barely pay our bills because everything is so expensive now that Chloe doesn't have the car. I just want things back to the way they were, Mom." I looked at them. Neither of them offered an apology. Neither offered to pay for the broken phone. They just wanted their comfort back. I turned around, grabbed a folder from my desk, and handed it to Julian. "What's this?" he asked suspiciously. "It's a standard lease agreement for the upstairs unit," I explained. "The rent is fair and it covers the utilities. If you want to stay, you sign it." Chloe snatched the paper and skimmed the numbers. "This is a joke. We're not paying you rent," she hissed. "Then you'll need to find another place to live," I said, not missing a beat. "You're both adults. My job as a parent was finished a long time ago." "You're just going to throw your own son out on the street?" Julian asked, sounding betrayed. "I'm offering my son and his wife a fair, legal contract," I corrected. "The choice is yours." Chloe threw the lease on the floor. "Fine. We're out. Keep your cold house. We'll find something better," she yelled, thinking it was a threat. She thought I was afraid of being alone in my old age. But the truth was, I'd felt much more alone living with the two of them. "Good," I said simply. I picked up the paper and closed the door. 2 weeks later, on a gray Saturday morning, they loaded the last of their boxes into a rented U-Haul. Julian gave me one last look in the hallway, probably hoping for tears or a last-minute cash gift for their security deposit. I just handed him a tin of cookies for the drive and wished them both the best. No bitter words, no dramatic speeches, and no forced hugs. As the truck pulled away, I closed the front door and turned the deadbolt. Twice. The silence that filled the house wasn't heavy. It was light as air. I walked upstairs to the now empty suite. It still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and dust, but the space was finally mine again. I opened all the windows to let the fresh breeze in and started planning. This big, sunny living room was going to be my new watercolor studio. That afternoon, I took the bus downtown and used the money from the car sale to buy a brand new iPhone. I set it up at a nearby cafe over a latte using brand new passwords that no one else knew. No one was ever going to smash my things again just because I set a boundary. I'm not a cold-hearted mother. I just stopped subsidizing the bad behavior of two adults. Some people think you have to endure any amount of disrespect just because it's family. But respect is a two-way street. And love doesn't mean letting yourself be a doormat. As I sat in my warm, quiet house that evening, I lit a candle and poured a glass of my favorite wine. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore because I was finally the one in the driver's seat. The shadows of the past were gone, and I was the queen of my own peaceful castle. And that was exactly how it was going to stay.